thank you for coming back. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land and pay my respect to elders present, past and emerging, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. This is our last session on observations. Before we start, can you tell me something you learned from the last session, or something that you've seen in your workplace that you have learned about observations?
I learned that even opportunities can arise observing the children in the playground that can be indicators of their stage of learning. I didn't know that before.
Excellent. All right. So by the end of this session, you'll have an understanding about different types of observations. We'll go through the 4 common ones that are used in early childhood. We will talk about how to write your own observations, the types of language to use when writing observations, interpreting observations, linking them to the ELF, and follow-ups, implementations, and what is next. So in this session we'll talk about I'll give you examples of the actual observations, the templates, the types of languages and phrases to use, and we'll be talking about subjective and objective language and why we use them. So on this slide you can see that there are these are the 4 most common observation types. So we'll start off with the learning story. So there is a example one there for you, and also a blank copy as well. So learning stories, they are the ones that are used majority of the time in early childhood settings. They are as simple as telling a story written in a narrative form. They are written with a lot of detail and descriptions. They can include individual as well as groups of children. And by writing in that narrative form, almost like reading a book or a story, it makes the learning really visible to the reader. As you can see, you can insert whatever photos that need to be done. Always put the date and the child, obviously write the observation there, the reflection, and the what's next. So this is just like a template, like a blanket copy. Some services it might look different, and also these days a lot of services are using apps such as Storypark or Story Hub to upload their observations, which obviously makes it much easier these days instead of putting everything on paper. So the next one over here we have is a running record. So running records are very detailed, so it records absolutely everything that goes on when you see it. So the running records go for about, sorry, I didn't give you a sheet. So there's the running records. So they're a bit different from the learning stories, because in the running records, they are time frames. So you record the event or the observation over a time frame of 10 minutes or less. So it's a very detailed account of exactly what the child does, what they say, which hand they use, did they run off and then come back. It is written while it is happening. So this is why technology is really great at the moment. So obviously you could record what was happening, and then later on when you have time off the floor to write up your observations, you can then go back to the video, and then you haven't missed any important detailing or events that have happened. The next one we have is an anecdote record. So there's those for you. So these are written after the event has happened. It is written in the past tense. It only focuses on one area of development, but it can also cover a few. This one also has a start and a finish time. Obviously, like where the observation happened, like the location, the activities or the learning experience that is happening, as well as writing the observation. And lastly, we have jottings. So I'll give you the jotting ones. So jottings are very short, detailed events. They are written in the past tense. They're about 1 or 2 sentences long, and they provide a bit of a snapshot of a particular behaviour or a skill or an interest that the child is learning. And we also have time samples, which I forgot to put up there. So time samples are used to depict particular behaviours in children. So you can observe this child for a space of 10, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, and you can write exactly the time, where the location is, what the activity the child is doing, what things you observed, and these are really good for if you have concerns for children's behaviour, or if you think there's a gap in their learning, or you think that there's, and you just have a particular concern, you're not quite sure what it is, but there's something there, and you can just gather as much information as you can about time samples, and they're really good. Did you have any questions before we move on?
No.
No? Okay. So, we're going to go straight in. And I've given you paper and pen open. Is the pen there?
No.
Okay, for you. So, we're going to go straight into writing our own observations. So, we're going to watch this video, and then you're going to make some notes, and then we'll discuss what you have observed.
I'm grateful that IELTS now offers one skill retake, so I can now focus on only one area. There's water for both the future boys. Thank you. Not too much water. There is one box. Minty.
Okay, so tell me what you observed or what you stood at watching that video.
2 young girls were sitting at a table. One girl distributed the placemats for cups to different people on the table, the two girls in the video and maybe an educator on the other side of the table, or maybe other people other places that weren't occupied. The two children had eye contact with each other and were speaking to each other. I didn't understand all of the words they were saying, but they were pretty happily interacting with each other. Then they were both given glasses and a jug of water was left on the table by the educator to allow the children to interact with the jug. One of the children picked up the jug and carefully poured some water into the cup and stopped pouring the water before the cup overflowed, which I thought was pretty good. Then I was interested to see what the second child might do. The first child placed down the jug and invited the second child to use it themselves, and then the second child got to repeat the process. They didn't fill their cup as much, but none was spilt and it didn't overflow. And then the first child encouraged them, warned them firstly not too much water, and then after there was only a small amount in the cup, encouraged them to fill it a little bit more. And then the first child actually helped to fill it a little bit more as well. And then they spoke a little bit about the mint tea, which was the liquid that they said they were pouring. And one child was playing with a spoon on the side of the table. I didn't know if that was going to be relevant, but then the child picked up the spoon and said, should we mix it? And waited for the first child to respond and asked again, mix it, like waiting for a response. Then there was a further interaction between the children, and the first girl obtained a second spoon and gave it to the second girl so that they would both be able to mix the water if they chose to do so.
That's excellent observations. So we're going to talk about subjective observations and subjective language. So often we use language or words that are influenced by our past, present and personal experiences, and this can be based upon our own bias and cultural background, and this can impact the way that we write observations with no fault of our own. Using some subjective language can cause the observations to come across as being judgmental or give the reader the impression that there's something wrong. So we're going to have a look at this picture. Can you tell me what you see in this picture?
A bright, beautiful flower meadow.
Yep. So, like you said, that it was beautiful. Like, you could say that this painting is beautiful, but everybody's perception of what beautiful means is very different. So that would be a subjective statement, because what's beautiful to one person can be ugly to another. So everyone's perception of what's beautiful means different things. So that's why we need to be really considerate of how we write our observations, and just be really careful about how we write and what we write. So objective language is based upon what we see, what we hear, what we taste, touch and smell. So if we look at the picture again, using objective language, can you tell me what you see?
Very many differently coloured flowers in a field on a bright but cloudy day.
Yep. So that's a much better way of describing what you see in the picture, as well as when we're observing, doing observations with children, because you could be writing something and then in your writing, like the language or the wording that you use can come across as being judgmental, or just putting the reader into a different mindset that you're not necessarily taking there, but the way that it's written, it has taken the reader there. And writing objectively in observations is extremely hard. So I've created a bit of a cheat sheet. So here are observation phrases and keywords that you can use, and words to avoid, like the child likes to do this. We don't really know if the child likes to do it. They are doing it. We avoid using words like good, stubborn, thinks, happy, the child knows, the child enjoys, the child wants that, and obviously negative words such as can't and doesn't. So you can take that with you. These are good to keep in your observation books. So when you are writing your observation, those words are there to help you write your observations. Okay. So we're going to go to the next slide. So phrases and words to avoid. So another important decision you need to make is the tone that you would describe to use when writing your observations. So we're going to look at this photo of Beatrice and the fruit. So this one says, Beatrice snatched the bowl of fruit and started eating it. I had to tell her to stop to share the fruit with Jack. As you can see, snatched is a pretty negative word to use. So a better way of describing that would be Beatrice is learning how to share out the food. I encouraged her by saying one for Beatrice and one for Jack. Can you see how the way that the second one is written is much more, like the tone is so much different. That this one's quite negative and paints a child in a negative way, where in the second one you're encouraging the child to develop those skills. And she does look quite young in that photo as well. So when do we observe? So observations can be written down at any time of the day. They can occur at the beginning of the day, middle of the day, at the end of the day. Rather than trying to collect all the information, it's best to have like a little notepad with you, or nowadays everybody has an iPad, so it's good to just quickly write in the notes a few dot points about what you have seen. Observations can happen at drop-off time, during meal times, in toileting times, and so by collecting all the data throughout the whole day, it can lead to not missing out on something that the child might be a morning person, so by the time the afternoon comes and you're trying to observe them doing something, the child is not going to respond in that way that you assume that they would if you were to do the same observation in the morning. Okay, so when we're writing our observations, we need to interpret them. So once you have written your observation, you'll need to interpret it. Sometimes it's called analyse. Various senses use various words, but they all pretty much mean the same thing. So depending on what type of observation method you are using, just be mindful of the relevant developmental domains that you use. So make sure we include emotional, social, cognitive, fine motor, gross motor, and also include language, expressive and receptive. Like you said in that video that we watched with the two girls with the mint in their water, you talked about how the two girls were interacting with each other. So when the two girls were interacting with each other, they were actually developing their conversational skills. So girl A took her turn at talking, then she waited, and then the next child spoke. So they took turns developing their conversational skills, instead of both of them just talking on the top of each other and them not being able to do that turn taking when people are talking to them. It's also important when interpreting observations that we write exactly the learning that has occurred, such as, did the child use verbal language? If they did, what did they say? If they, use cues such as, pointing or tugging on your clothes, include all of that in the interpretation. You could include things like, the child picked up the pencil with their right hand. You can also talk about, like, did the child interact with other children? If they did, what did they say? Were they verbal with the other children, or did they just sit next to each other and play? You could also talk about, what did the children say? Did they turn take? Did they engage in conversation with other adults as well? And did the children use their problem-solving skills? So after do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. So after you've written your observations, you need to link them to the ELF. So here are the 5 learning outcomes. So there's children have a strong sense of identity, children are connected with and contribute to their world, children have a strong sense of well-being, children are confident learners, and children are effective communicators. So, for example, with the 2 children with the mint, you could include outcome 5 because they were effectively communicating with each other. This is probably very overwhelming at the moment, but once you start to become really familiar with the outcomes, I can also print this sheet off for you as well, so it becomes easier for you to go, oh yes, that links straight to outcome 4 or outcome 3. And the more you use it, the more you become familiar. It just becomes second nature, and some people do know all of these off by heart, so it just becomes much easier the more you interact with it as well. And also on this side, I've listed activities or dramatic play things that connect to each outcome. So as you can see, outcome 2, children are connected and contribute to their world. So that's like making friendships, having relationships with educators, being able to sit at group time, how they create blocks in block corner, how they play in dramatic play area, as well as dancing and singing, as well as the book corner. So these outcomes are also help us have a high expectation for every child, regardless of their circumstances and capabilities. Like I said, it will take you a little time to get used to it, but over time it will become much easier. So after you've done the linking to the ELF, and also some services, when they also have the apps, sometimes on the side have the ELF listed there, and some of them you can just pick it up and drop it into the actual observation as well. So after you've interpreted, you need to do a follow-up and a what's next. So this will help you plan to help the child develop their skills. So you will need to decide what happens next. Sometimes it's called a follow-up, what's next. They're just called various things, but they all mean the same thing. So you plan these activities or particular skills or experiences that you want the child to engage in order to increase the child's whatever skill that might be. For example, the child might be going to school and doesn't know how to hold a pencil correctly, so you would start off by doing a lot of fine motor activities such as playing with Play-Doh and role modelling how to do that with the child, like the squeezing, and that will help the child develop the small muscles in their hands in order to be able to hold the pencil correctly and write. Before we move on to the next slide, are there any questions?
When you do the follow-up, is that for the individual child or a follow-up that we would do in a group situation?
So it depends on how you've written the observation. So in the observation, you could just be focusing on one child, so that follow-up would then just be for the one child. But when you're writing an observation in a group setting, every child is going to be at a different stage of learning, so therefore you have to plan for that individual child as well as a group too. So you're going to have to put both of those onto the curriculum. Alright, now we're going to write your own observations. So with a paper and pen there, we're going to watch these two videos. You're going to make some notes, and then with the templates that we've got here, you can write your own observations, and then with me, you can share what your follow-up or experience will be for that child or children.
I'm going to write it down now.
Maybe just think about what follow-up activity you would do. So, can you tell me a bit about that observation and what the follow-up activity that you would plan for those children or child?
The observation were several children, each with bowls that contained small items, which I discovered were seeds,
Mm-hmm.
different types of seeds, and they had different amounts of seeds in their bowls.
Mm-hmm.
There was talk about what the different seeds looked like, if they could be planted, if the children would share and redistribute seeds
Mm-hmm.
to one child who had few or no seeds in their bowl. Talked about different birds that might visit the centre and if they might eat the seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Which they talked about which different birds come and what their seeds, one might like honey, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then their children helped move some large shapes around the children helped the educator move some large shapes to form other combined shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a number of times when the educator engaged in a discussion with the children, and then the children interacted both with the educator and with each other.
Well done. And what follow-up activity would you plan for those children?
I'd probably plan a follow-up activity about the seeds,
Mm-hmm.
maybe to learn a bit about common birds that might visit the area and how their diets might differ,
Mm-hmm.
and also maybe what might happen if the seeds were planted, which was another thing that the educator had mentioned to the children as well.
That's excellent. And with observations, the what's next, there's no right or wrong answer. It can be anything from planting the seeds to see where they grow. One of the girls was talking about the patterns that were on the seed. You can go through patterning. They had different variety of seeds. You can go through sorting seeds. There's a lot of different ways that you can venture out with extending the children's learning. And what's the second one?
Say goodbye to appliances.
Okay, can you tell me a bit about that observation and what your follow-up would be?
The observation were two young children opposite each other at a table, both playing with a single colour of paint each, different colour each. The educator encouraging them to tip out the paint and interact with the paint with their hands. The educator demonstrating and suggesting different ways that they might interact, smooth it, or use sharp writing on it, whether it just be squiggling with the individual fingertips rather than the whole hand, whether you might write letters or numbers or even later on a whole name, or else draw a picture. The educator said, oh well, the image that I've created now looks like noodles. Then the educator introduced other colours, and the children were the instigators of saying, let's mix the two colours we have together, and then let's mix the other colours, and then the children instigated an observation that I'm mixing these colours and now it's turning brown, so they were able to find the colour change. And the children were also sharing a space on the table and interacting with each other's colours, and the colours that were being poured in a useful sharing way. Neither of the children were protective or aggressive about which areas were being used by the other. The follow-ups could be experimenting with different colours that mix together and the result of those colours being mixed. Maybe also using the paint smearing and the sharp drawing with fingertips to help a child to practice letter writing and number writing.
They're all excellent examples. Well done. That's a wrap up. With the observations that you've written there, later on you will write them in, you'll choose one of the templates, you'll write it inside the template and email that to me, and I'll go through that and give you some feedback about that, or ways to improve, or any feedback that I will have for you about writing observations, if you're on the right track, all of those things. Did you have any questions for me?
When I write the observation, do I get to choose between any of these methods?
Yes, correct, yes. Without any of the four that we discussed earlier.
Okay.
So thank you so much. I hope you gained some new skills and it wasn't too overwhelming for you, and hopefully within time you will be confident enough to write your own observations.
Right.
And once we're finished here, I'll get you to also fill out the feedback form.
Okay.
Thank you so much.